The invitation arrived on cream-colored paper with elegant gold lettering. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell, Military Honors Ceremony. My sister's name, printed in formal script beneath the Department of Defense seal. I held it carefully, running my fingers over the raised lettering, feeling proud yet somehow distant from this moment I'd waited years to witness. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The morning had started with such promise. I'd driven 4 hours from Chicago, leaving before dawn to ensure I'd arrive early for Sarah's ceremony. The October air carried that crisp bite that reminded me of our childhood in Minnesota, when Sarah and I would rake leaves in our backyard while Dad grilled burgers, and Mom called us in for hot chocolate. Sarah was always the organized one, the planner, the sister who remembered birthdays and anniversaries with military precision even before she'd actually joined the military, which made this situation all the more baffling. Standing at the security checkpoint of Fort Harrison, I watched other families stream past me, their names efficiently located on the guards list. An elderly couple with a son in dress blues. A young woman clutching flowers, probably someone's wife. Children in their Sunday best, excited to see their parents or siblings honored. Everyone belonged somewhere, everyone except me. "Could you check under Crawford?" I asked the guard again, my voice carrying a note of desperation I tried to suppress. "Crawford, Jennifer Crawford. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell's sister." The guard, a young man with kind eyes and the patience of someone who'd dealt with countless confused family members, scrolled through his tablet once more. "Ma'am, I've checked every variation. Mitchell, Crawford, even cross-referenced with Sarah. I'm not showing Jennifer Crawford on the approved guest list for today's ceremony." The weight of my purse suddenly felt heavier on my shoulder. Inside was the carefully chosen gift I'd brought for Sarah, a vintage compass that had belonged to our grandfather, a World War II veteran who'd inspired Sarah's military career. I'd spent weeks having it professionally restored, the brass polished to a warm glow, the inscription re-etched with loving precision. "To those who find their true north," the words our grandfather had always said when he told us stories about navigating through difficult times. "There must be some mistake," I said, though doubt was already creeping into my voice. Sarah and I had grown apart over the years, our relationship strained by distance and the demands of her military career. Phone calls became emails, which became text messages, which eventually became holiday cards with brief, formal updates about promotions and deployments. But surely she wouldn't exclude me from something this important. The guard gestured toward a small office building adjacent to the checkpoint. "You might want to speak with the administrative office. They handle guest list issues. Building 12, just around that corner." I thanked him and walked toward the building, my heels clicking against the concrete with each step. The sound echoed off the nearby buildings, creating a rhythm that matched my racing heartbeat. Fort Harrison stretched out before me, a maze of efficient buildings and perfectly manicured grounds. Everything was orderly, purposeful, reflecting the military precision that had shaped my sister's life for the past 15 years. Building 12 was a modest structure with small windows and a sign that read "Visitor Services." Inside, fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a sterile institutional glow. A staff sergeant behind the desk looked up from her computer screen as I approached. "Good morning, ma'am. How can I help you?" I explained my situation, trying to keep my voice steady despite the growing knot in my stomach. The sergeant, whose nameplate read Rodriguez, listened patiently before typing something into her computer. "Let me pull up the ceremony details," she said, her fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. "Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell's ceremony is scheduled for 1,100 hours in the main auditorium. I see she submitted her guest list 3 weeks ago." She paused, studying her screen. "Unfortunately, I don't see your name on the approved list." The words confirmed what I'd feared but hadn't wanted to accept. Sarah had deliberately left me off the list. But why? We'd had our differences, but this felt like a deliberate exclusion that cut deeper than any argument we'd ever had. "Is there any way to add someone to the list?" I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. Sergeant Rodriguez shook her head sympathetically. Security protocols are pretty strict, especially for formal ceremonies. The list was finalized last week, however. She hesitated, then leaned forward slightly. You could try speaking with the ceremony coordinator. Sometimes they can make exceptions for immediate family members if there's been a genuine oversight. She gave me directions to another building, where I found myself in a larger office filled with the controlled chaos of event planning. Charts covered the walls, showing seating arrangements and ceremony schedules. A captain with graying temples and tired eyes looked up from a stack of papers as I entered. "Captain Williams," he said, extending his hand. "What can I do for you?" I explained my situation for the third time, watching his expression grow increasingly uncomfortable as I spoke. He pulled out a thick folder and flipped through several pages before finding what he was looking for. "Miss Crawford, I have Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell's guest list right here. She was very specific about the attendees. Submitted it early, no changes requested. I see her parents, a few colleagues, some family friends from her hometown." He looked up at me with genuine regret. "I'm sorry, but there's no Jennifer Crawford listed." The reality hit me with crushing finality. This wasn't an administrative error or a computer glitch. Sarah had consciously decided not to include me in one of the most important moments of her career. The sister who'd shared a bedroom with me for 18 years, who'd taught me to ride a bike and helped me with math homework, who'd held my hand during our parents' divorce. She'd chosen to celebrate this achievement without me. "I understand," I managed to say, though my voice cracked slightly. "Thank you for checking." Captain Williams studied me for a moment, and I could see the wheels turning in his mind. "Look, I'm not supposed to do this, but the ceremony is being held in the main auditorium. It's a public building on base. If you were to find your way there and stand in the back, security wouldn't necessarily check for credentials once you're inside. I can't officially recommend it, but..." He shrugged meaningfully. I felt a spark of hope. It wasn't an ideal solution, but it would allow me to witness Sarah's moment of recognition, even if I couldn't celebrate with her afterward. "Thank you, Captain. I appreciate your understanding." He gave me rough directions to the auditorium, along with a warning about staying discreet. I left his office with renewed determination, clutching my purse tighter as I navigated the base's network of sidewalks and parking areas. The auditorium was an imposing building with stone columns and large windows that reflected the morning sun. Military personnel moved in and out with purposeful strides, their uniforms crisp and their bearing confident. I felt increasingly out of place in my civilian clothes, a navy blue dress that I'd chosen because Sarah had once said it brought out my eyes, paired with heels that were already making my feet ache. I found a side entrance and slipped inside, hoping to blend in with the small crowd of family members and colleagues who were taking their seats. The auditorium was larger than I'd expected, with several hundred seats arranged in neat rows facing a stage decorated with flags and military insignia. A podium stood at the center, flanked by chairs for the ceremony's participants. Near the back, I found an empty seat in the last row, partially concealed by a support column. From here, I could see the stage clearly while remaining relatively invisible to the ceremony coordinators who were making final preparations. My heart pounded as I settled into the seat, clutching the compass in my purse like a talisman. The auditorium gradually filled with guests. I watched families embrace, colleagues shake hands, and children fidget in their dress clothes. Everyone seemed to know exactly where they belonged, while I felt like an intruder in my own sister's moment of triumph. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, literally hiding in the shadows of Sarah's achievement. A military band began warming up near the stage, their instruments creating a cacophony of scales and warm-up exercises. The sound echoed off the auditorium's high ceiling, mixing with the gentle murmur of conversation from the assembled guests. I checked my phone, 10:45 a.m. 15 minutes until the ceremony began. That's when I heard the voice that would change everything. "Excuse me, miss. Are you Jennifer Crawford?" I looked up to see a tall man in a general's uniform, his chest decorated with ribbons and medals that spoke of a distinguished career. His eyes were kind but sharp, and there was something about his presence that commanded immediate attention. "Yes, I am," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. He extended his hand with a warm smile. "General Robert Harrison, I've been looking forward to meeting you." The general's handshake was firm, confident, and carried the weight of someone accustomed to command. His uniform was immaculate, each ribbon and medal positioned with mathematical precision. The brass buttons caught the auditorium's overhead lights, and I noticed his wedding ring, a simple gold band that suggested decades of commitment. "General Harrison," I repeated, trying to process why this high-ranking officer would be seeking me out. "I'm sorry, but I think there might be some confusion. I'm not actually supposed to be here." His eyebrows raised slightly, creating lines across his weathered forehead. "Not supposed to be here? That's curious. Sarah spoke about you extensively during our deployment briefings. She mentioned you'd be attending today's ceremony." The words hit me like a physical blow. Sarah had mentioned me to her commanding officer, yet somehow I'd been excluded from the guest list. The contradiction made no sense, and I felt my confusion deepen into something approaching despair. "There seems to be some kind of mix-up," I said, gesturing vaguely toward the back of the auditorium where I'd been attempting to hide. "My name wasn't on the approved guest list. I've been trying to figure out how to watch the ceremony without causing any disruption." General Harrison's expression shifted from confusion to concern, then to something that looked remarkably like anger, not directed at me, but at the situation itself. He pulled out his phone and made a quick call, speaking in low, clipped tones that I couldn't quite make out over the background noise of the filling auditorium. "A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel." Now, back to where we left off. "There's been an administrative error," he said after ending the call. "My aide is looking into it right now. But regardless of paperwork mishaps, you belong here today. Sarah's family should be in the front row, not hiding in the back corner." Before I could protest, he was guiding me toward the front of the auditorium with the kind of authority that brooks no argument. Other guests stepped aside automatically, recognizing his rank and deferring to his presence. I felt simultaneously grateful and mortified, aware that every eye in the building was now tracking our progress toward the reserved seating area. The front row was marked with small placards, indicating it was reserved for family members. General Harrison gestured toward an empty seat directly in the center, positioned for optimal viewing of the ceremony. The seat next to it was occupied by an elderly woman in an elegant purple dress, her silver hair styled in a perfect wave. "Mrs. Mitchell," General Harrison said, addressing the woman, "I'd like you to meet Jennifer Crawford, Sarah's sister." The woman's face lit up with recognition and warmth. "Jennifer! Oh my goodness, I've heard so much about you. I'm Dorothy Mitchell, Sarah's mother-in-law." "Well, would-be mother-in-law. Sarah and my son David have been engaged for 2 years now, but with all the deployments," she trailed off, then focused on me with renewed interest. "Sarah talks about you constantly. She was so worried you might not be able to make it today." I felt the ground shifting beneath my feet. Sarah was engaged? To someone named David? And she'd been worried about me not attending? None of this aligned with the reality of the guest list situation or the distance that had grown between us over the years. "I'm sorry," I said, settling into the seat beside Mrs. Mitchell. "I think there might be some confusion. Sarah and I haven't spoken in several months. I only learned about today's ceremony from the invitation, and even then, there were some issues with the guest list." Mrs. Mitchell's expression shifted to concern. "Oh dear, that doesn't sound right at all. Sarah specifically asked me to save the seat next to mine for her sister. She said it was important that the family be together for today's recognition." General Harrison, who had been listening to our exchange with growing interest, leaned down slightly. "Ms. Crawford, I think there's something you need to understand about your sister's recent service record, something that might explain why today's ceremony is particularly significant." The auditorium lights dimmed slightly, signaling that the ceremony was about to begin. Military personnel began taking their positions on stage, and the background conversations gradually quieted to a respectful murmur. I could see Sarah among the group of officers waiting in the wings, her uniform pristine and her posture radiating the confidence I'd always admired in her. "What do you mean?" I asked General Harrison, though I had to keep my voice low as the ceremony preparations continued around us. He checked his watch, then made a decision. "After the ceremony, I'd like to speak with you privately. There are things about Sarah's service that she's probably never told you. Things that might help you understand why your presence here today means more than you realize." Before I could respond, a colonel stepped up to the podium and called for everyone's attention. The ceremony was beginning, and whatever revelation General Harrison had in mind would have to wait. I settled back into my seat, acutely aware of the gift compass in my purse and the growing sense that I'd been operating with incomplete information about my sister's life. The ceremony itself was a masterclass in military precision. Officers were recognized for various achievements: medals for valor, commendations for leadership, promotions that marked significant career milestones. Each presentation was accompanied by a brief recitation of the recipient's accomplishments, read in the measured cadence of official military language. When Sarah's name was called, she walked to the podium with the bearing of someone comfortable with command. Her uniform was decorated with ribbons I didn't recognize, and her expression carried a gravity that seemed at odds with the Sarah I remembered from our childhood. This was clearly a woman who had seen and done things that had fundamentally shaped her character. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell, the presenter began, is being recognized today for exceptional leadership during Operation Desert Shield, where she commanded a logistics division responsible for maintaining supply lines across 200 square miles of hostile territory. The words washed over me, but their full meaning didn't immediately register. Sarah had commanded a division? My sister, who used to be afraid of spiders and cried during sad movies, had been responsible for military operations in hostile territory. During a 3-month deployment, Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell's innovative supply chain management ensured that forward operating bases remained fully operational despite consistent enemy harassment and challenging terrain conditions. I found myself leaning forward, hanging on every word. This was a side of Sarah's life that had been completely hidden from me. The phone calls and emails I'd received over the years had been cheerful and superficial, focusing on base life and military friendships. She'd never mentioned combat zones or life-threatening situations. Her leadership was particularly crucial during the siege of Forward Operating Base Delta, where her strategic thinking and resource allocation prevented what could have been a catastrophic supply failure. Mrs. Mitchell leaned over and whispered, "She saved over 300 soldiers during that operation. David was one of them. That's how they met." The information hit me like a revelation. Sarah hadn't just been playing it safe in some administrative role. She'd been making life and death decisions, responsible for the welfare of hundreds of people, operating in conditions I couldn't even imagine. The sister I'd thought I knew was apparently someone far more complex and capable than I'd ever realized. The presenter continued, detailing additional accomplishments and leadership roles that painted a picture of a highly skilled officer who had consistently exceeded expectations. With each new piece of information, I felt my understanding of Sarah's life expanding and my own assumptions crumbling. When the formal recognition concluded, Sarah received a standing ovation from the assembled guests. I rose with everyone else, clapping until my hands stung, feeling pride mixed with a strange sense of grief for the relationship I'd allowed to deteriorate through neglect and misunderstanding. As the ceremony concluded and guests began to mill about in the reception area, General Harrison appeared at my elbow with the timing of someone accustomed to managing complex logistics. "Ms. Crawford, if you have a few minutes, I'd like to show you something." He led me away from the main reception area, through a corridor lined with military portraits and historical displays. We stopped at a conference room where he produced a manila folder thick with documents and photographs. "Your sister has been recommended for the Bronze Star," he said without preamble. "The paperwork is still being processed, but I wanted you to understand the scope of what she accomplished during her last deployment." He opened the folder to reveal photographs of military vehicles, supply convoys, and what appeared to be a forward operating base in desert terrain. The images were grainy, but detailed enough to convey the harsh conditions and apparent danger of the environment. Sarah's division was responsible for maintaining supply lines through some of the most contested territory we've operated in during the past decade. Her logistics innovations kept our forces supplied and operational under conditions that would have broken less capable commanders. He turned to another section of the folder, revealing what appeared to be official after-action reports and commendations from other officers. The language was technical and military-specific, but the overall tone was one of profound respect and gratitude. During the siege I mentioned earlier, enemy forces had cut our primary supply routes and were systematically targeting our resupply convoys. Sarah developed an alternative logistics network that used unconventional routes and timing to maintain critical supply flow. I studied the photographs, trying to reconcile these images of harsh desert conditions with my memories of Sarah organizing neighborhood barbecues and helping me move apartments. The cognitive dissonance was almost overwhelming. But what I really want you to understand, General Harrison continued, is how often she talked about you during our command meetings. He pulled out a small notebook, worn and creased from obvious use. I keep notes during deployment briefings. Helps me remember the human elements that are crucial for maintaining morale. Sarah mentioned you frequently, usually in the context of wanting to make you proud. He flipped through several pages before finding what he was looking for. Here, from a briefing 3 months ago, Colonel Mitchell expressed concern about maintaining family relationships during extended deployment. Specifically mentioned wanting to ensure her sister Jennifer understands the importance of her service commitment. The words blurred slightly as tears I hadn't expected began to form. Sarah had been thinking about me, worried about our relationship, even while managing life and death responsibilities in a combat zone. And here, General Harrison continued, turning to another page. From last month, Colonel Mitchell requested leave schedule adjustment to ensure attendance at Sisters Art Exhibition in Chicago. I remember that conversation. She was determined to make it to your gallery showing. I felt my world shifting again. My gallery showing was canceled, I said quietly. The space fell through at the last minute. I sent Sarah an email about it, but I never heard back. General Harrison's expression grew understanding. She was in the field during that time frame. Communication was severely limited. Sometimes we'd go days without reliable contact with the outside world. She probably never received your message. The pieces of a puzzle I hadn't even known existed began falling into place. Sarah hadn't been ignoring me or growing distant out of choice. She'd been operating under conditions that made normal family communication nearly impossible, while carrying responsibilities that dwarfed anything I'd ever imagined. There's something else, General Harrison said, his voice taking on a more serious tone, something that might explain today's guest list situation. He pulled out another document, this one bearing official seals and signatures. Sarah submitted a request 3 weeks ago for enhanced security protocols for today's ceremony. She was concerned about potential threats related to her recent service record. The implications began to dawn on me. You mean the guest list restrictions weren't about excluding me? They were about protecting everyone? Exactly. Sarah was trying to balance her desire to have a family present with legitimate security concerns. She specifically requested that the immediate family be given special protection protocols. He paused, studying my face. Which makes it even more puzzling that your name wasn't on the approved list. The mystery deepened, but now it was accompanied by relief rather than hurt. Sarah hadn't excluded me out of spite or indifference. Something else had gone wrong, some administrative failure that had prevented her carefully laid plans from working properly. General Harrison, I need to ask you something directly, I said, steeling myself for the answer. In your professional opinion, what kind of person is my sister? As a commander, as a leader, as someone you've served with? He didn't hesitate. She's the kind of officer I would want leading my own son into combat. Intelligent, decisive, deeply committed to the welfare of her people. She has a gift for seeing solutions where others see only problems. And she has the courage to implement those solutions under the most challenging circumstances. He closed the folder and looked at me directly. But more than that, she's someone who carries her family with her wherever she goes. Your sister talks about you with a pride and affection that's rare among officers at her level. She's never forgotten where she came from, or the people who matter most to her. As we prepared to return to the reception, I finally understood that the distance I'd felt between Sarah and me had been largely of my own creation. I'd interpreted her military commitments as choices that excluded me, when in reality she'd been fighting to maintain our connection under circumstances that made normal family relationships nearly impossible. The question now was whether it was too late to bridge the gap that had grown between us, or whether today's ceremony might represent a new beginning for a relationship I'd almost given up on. Walking back toward the reception area, I felt like I was carrying a completely different understanding of the past 2 years. The hallway seemed brighter, the military portraits on the walls more meaningful. Each face represented someone who had made sacrifices I was only beginning to comprehend. My sister's face should have been among them. The reception was in full swing when we returned. Round tables covered with white linens held carefully arranged flowers and small American flags. Officers in dress uniforms mingled with families, their conversations a mixture of military jargon and the universal language of proud relatives celebrating achievements. The atmosphere was warm despite the formal setting, filled with the kind of camaraderie that comes from shared purpose and mutual respect. I spotted Sarah immediately. She was standing near the far wall, engaged in animated conversation with a group of younger officers who were clearly hanging on her every word. Even from across the room, I could see the confidence in her posture, the way she gestured while speaking, the respect evident in her listeners' faces. This was Sarah in her element, commanding attention not through rank alone, but through genuine expertise and leadership ability. But there was something else I noticed. A subtle tension in her shoulders, a way her eyes occasionally scanned the room as if searching for something, or someone. "She's been looking for you," Mrs. Mitchell appeared at my elbow, balancing a small plate of reception food. Every few minutes she glances toward the entrance. "David mentioned that she seemed unusually anxious about whether you'd received the invitation properly." The irony wasn't lost on me. While I'd been convinced that Sarah had deliberately excluded me, she'd been worried about whether I'd even show up. The misunderstanding had created parallel anxieties that had prevented us from connecting when we both wanted the same thing. "Mrs. Mitchell, can I ask you something?" I said, accepting a glass of punch from a passing server. "How long have you known Sarah? Through David, I mean." Her face softened with the kind of expression that suggested she was about to share something meaningful. "About 18 months now. David brought her home for Christmas last year, and I could tell immediately that she was special. Not just because of how my son looked at her, but because of how she interacted with our family." She sipped her punch thoughtfully before continuing. "You know, she spent most of that visit asking questions about you. David said she'd brought photo albums and wanted to show us pictures of her sister's artwork. She was so proud when she talked about your gallery exhibitions and your teaching." My throat tightened. "She talked about my art?" "Oh, constantly. She has this way of lighting up when she mentions your paintings. She told us about how you used to paint together as children, how you taught her to see colors differently. She even showed us some photographs of pieces you'd created, landscapes, I think, with the most beautiful use of light." The memory came flooding back. Sarah and I, probably 8 and 10 years old, sitting at our kitchen table with a set of watercolors our aunt had given us for Christmas. Sarah had been frustrated because her trees looked flat and lifeless, while mine seemed to have depth and dimension. I'd spent an entire afternoon teaching her about shadows and highlights, showing her how to layer colors to create the illusion of three-dimensional form. "She said you had a gift for teaching," Mrs. Mitchell continued, "that you could explain complicated concepts in ways that made perfect sense. She wished she could have inherited that ability. Said it would have made her a better instructor for the young officers under her command." The conversation was interrupted by the approach of a tall, lean man in dress uniform. His bearing suggested military training, but his face carried the kind of warmth that immediately put people at ease. He extended his hand with a smile that reminded me of someone, though I couldn't immediately place who. "You must be Jennifer," he said. "I'm David Reynolds. I've been looking forward to meeting you for months." The family resemblance to Mrs. Mitchell was unmistakable. The same kind eyes, the same genuine smile. But there was something else in his expression, a depth that suggested he'd seen serious things and come through them with his humanity intact. "Sarah talks about you all the time," he continued. "She's incredibly proud of your artistic career. She has photographs of your paintings on her office wall at the base. Says they remind her of what she's fighting to protect." I felt tears threatening again. I had no idea. We've grown so far apart over the years. I thought she'd moved on from our childhood, found new priorities. David's expression grew more serious. "Can I tell you something that might help you understand Sarah better? Something she probably hasn't shared with you because she doesn't want you to worry?" I nodded, though I wasn't sure I was prepared for whatever revelation was coming. During our last deployment, Sarah's convoy was attacked while she was personally overseeing a supply run to Forward Operating Base Delta. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, and she could have sent subordinates to handle the mission. But she insisted on going herself because she knew the risks and didn't want to ask anyone else to face them. He paused, clearly choosing his words carefully. The attack lasted 6 hours. Sarah coordinated the defense while simultaneously managing the logistics of getting critical supplies to soldiers who were running out of ammunition and medical supplies. She saved lives that day, but she also came very close to losing her own. The reception noise seemed to fade into the background as I processed this information. My sister, the same person who used to be afraid of thunderstorms, had voluntarily put herself in mortal danger to protect other people. The reason I'm telling you this, David continued, is because during the worst part of that firefight, when it looked like they might not make it out, Sarah asked me to make sure you knew how much she loved you. She said she'd never been good at expressing emotions, but that you were the most important person in her life. I had to set down my punch glass because my hands were shaking. Why didn't she tell me any of this herself? Because she didn't want you to carry the weight of knowing how dangerous her job really is. She wanted you to be able to focus on your art and your life without constantly worrying about whether she was safe. She thought she was protecting you by keeping you at a distance from the realities of her service. The pieces were falling into place, but they were creating a picture that was both beautiful and heartbreaking. Sarah had been carrying the burden of protecting not just the soldiers under her command, but also the sister she loved, by shielding me from the truth about her experiences. David, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. He nodded, his expression serious. The guest list situation today, was that really an administrative error? Or was there something more deliberate about it? His face clouded over, and I could see him weighing how much to reveal. Sarah specifically requested that you be given VIP status for today's ceremony. She wanted you seated in the front row, with special security protocols to ensure your safety. She submitted your information weeks ago. Then what happened? David exchanged a glance with Mrs. Mitchell, who nodded encouragingly. There was a security review of all attendees. Someone in the administrative chain flagged your name because you don't have a direct military connection. They were being overly cautious about potential security risks. The explanation made sense, but it also revealed another layer of the misunderstanding. Sarah had been trying to give me special treatment, while security personnel had been trying to protect the ceremony from potential threats. My exclusion hadn't been malicious. It had been the result of competing priorities and poor communication. Sarah was furious when she found out this morning, David continued. She spent an hour on the phone with various administrative offices, trying to get the situation resolved. She was prepared to delay the entire ceremony if necessary to ensure you could attend. The image of Sarah fighting bureaucratic battles on my behalf, on what should have been her day of recognition, was almost too much to bear. While I'd been feeling hurt and excluded, she'd been advocating for me with the kind of determination she'd shown in combat situations. I need to talk to her, I said, scanning the room to locate Sarah again. She was still with the group of young officers, but now she was looking directly at me, her expression a mixture of hope and uncertainty. Before you do, Mrs. Mitchell said gently, there's something else you should know. Sarah has been planning to visit you in Chicago next month. She's arranged leave time specifically to attend your next gallery exhibition. She wanted to surprise you. The information hit me like a physical blow. Not only had Sarah been thinking about me and working to include me in her military life, but she'd been planning to actively participate in my civilian life as well. The distance between us had been largely illusory, maintained by misunderstandings and failed communications rather than genuine indifference. I excused myself from David and Mrs. Mitchell and began walking towards Sarah. The distance across the reception room felt enormous, as if I were traversing years of accumulated misunderstandings and missed connections. Other guests moved out of my way, perhaps sensing the significance of the moment. Sarah saw me coming and said something to the officers around her. They stepped back respectfully, creating a private space for our reunion. As I got closer, I could see the nervousness in her eyes, the way she was holding herself with military precision to mask her emotional vulnerability. Jennifer, she said when I reached her, I wasn't sure you'd come. I almost didn't, I admitted. There were some issues with the guest list. Her expression immediately shifted to anger. I heard about that. I'm so sorry. I tried to fix it as soon as I found out, but by then you'd already arrived and… Sarah, stop, I interrupted her before she could launch into what was clearly going to be a detailed explanation and apology. I understand what happened. General Harrison explained the security situation. Relief flooded her features. I wanted you here so badly. This recognition doesn't mean anything to me if I can't share it with the people who matter most. I reached into my purse and pulled out the carefully wrapped compass. I brought you something. It was Grandpa's. Sarah's eyes widened as she recognized the vintage compass. Her hands shook slightly as she accepted it, and I could see tears forming in her eyes. He always said it would help us find our true north, I said, repeating the words our grandfather had used countless times during our childhood. Jennifer, Sarah started to speak, then stopped, apparently overwhelmed by emotion. I know, I said simply. David told me about the convoy attack. About what you've been doing over there. Her face went pale. He wasn't supposed to tell you about that. I didn't want you to worry. That's the problem, Sarah. You've been trying to protect me from your life, and I've been interpreting that as rejection. We've both been so busy trying to spare each other's feelings that we've stopped actually communicating. She nodded, tears now flowing freely. I missed you so much during the deployment. There were times when I thought I might not make it home, and all I could think about was how I'd wasted so much time maintaining distance between us. I stepped forward and wrapped my arms around her, feeling the tension in her shoulders gradually release as she accepted the embrace. We stood there for a long moment, surrounded by the celebration but focused entirely on each other. I'm so proud of you, I whispered. Not just for today's recognition, but for everything you've accomplished. For the person you've become. When we finally separated, Sarah wiped her eyes and looked at me with an expression I remembered from our childhood. The look she used to get when she was about to share something important. Jennifer, there's something else I need to tell you. Something I've been wanting to share for months. I braced myself for another revelation, though I couldn't imagine what else there could be. David and I are getting married next month. We wanted to wait until after the ceremony to make the official announcement, but I need you to know that you're not just invited to the wedding. I want you to be my maid of honor. The request hit me with overwhelming emotion. After feeling excluded from today's ceremony, the idea of being central to Sarah's wedding was almost too much to process. Are you sure? I asked. After all the distance between us, all the misunderstandings? Especially because of that, Sarah said firmly. You're my sister, Jennifer. You're the person who taught me about art and beauty and seeing the world through different eyes. You're the one who showed me that strength comes in many forms, not just military ones. She paused, looking around the reception room filled with military colleagues and family members. All of this, the ceremony, the recognition, the career I've built, it's meaningful because it allows me to protect the things I love most. And you're at the top of that list. I felt a sense of completion that I hadn't experienced in years. The sister I'd thought I'd lost had been there all along, carrying me with her through experiences I couldn't have imagined, fighting to maintain our connection despite circumstances that made normal family relationships nearly impossible. Yes, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I would be honored to be your maid of honor. As we embraced again, I caught General Harrison's eye across the room. He was watching our reunion with the satisfied expression of someone who had successfully completed a difficult mission. He raised his glass in a small toast, acknowledging what we'd all accomplished together. The ceremony had been about recognizing Sarah's military achievements, but the real victory was the restoration of a relationship that had been damaged by misunderstanding and healed by truth. Sometimes the most important battles are fought not with weapons or strategy, but with honesty and the courage to bridge the distances we create between ourselves and the people we love most. The reception continued around us, but the atmosphere had shifted fundamentally. Where before I had felt like an outsider looking in, now I was part of the celebration in ways I hadn't expected. Officers approached to congratulate Sarah on her recognition, and she consistently introduced me as, quote, my sister Jennifer, the artist. Each introduction carried a note of pride that made my chest tighten with emotion. Captain Williams, the ceremony coordinator who had helped me earlier, appeared at Sarah's elbow with a clipboard and an apologetic expression. Colonel Mitchell, I wanted to personally apologize for the guest list confusion. We've identified the administrative breakdown that caused Ms. Crawford's name to be removed from the approved attendees. Sarah's posture immediately shifted to what I was beginning to recognize as her command presence. What exactly happened, Captain? The security review flagged several civilian attendees for additional screening. Your sister's name was accidentally moved to a pending verification list rather than being processed normally. By the time we realized the error, the final guest list had already been distributed to security personnel. I watched Sarah process this information with the same analytical approach she'd probably use to solve logistics problems in combat situations. Who was responsible for the security review? That would be Major Thompson from Base Security. He's already been briefed on the situation and has implemented new protocols to prevent similar errors in the future. Sarah nodded curtly. I want a full report on my desk by tomorrow morning. This kind of administrative failure is unacceptable, especially when it affects family members of personnel being honored. The captain's expression showed he understood the seriousness of Sarah's displeasure. Yes, ma'am. The report will be completed by 0800 hours. As he departed, I found myself impressed by Sarah's handling of the situation. She'd managed to be both professional and protective, addressing the systemic problem while ensuring accountability. It was a side of her personality that I'd never witnessed before, and it gave me new insights into why she'd been successful in military leadership. You didn't have to do that, I said once the captain was out of earshot. I understand it was just an administrative mistake. Sarah's expression softened, but her voice remained firm. Jennifer, you're my family. When someone fails to properly handle something that affects my family, it's absolutely my responsibility to address it. That's not just about being your sister, it's about maintaining standards that protect everyone. The explanation resonated with something General Harrison had said earlier about Sarah's commitment to the welfare of her people. She wasn't just a soldier who followed orders. She was a leader who took personal responsibility for the systems under her command. A young lieutenant approached our group, clearly nervous about interrupting but determined to deliver his message. Excuse me, Colonel Mitchell. General Harrison asked me to inform you that the special presentation is ready whenever you are. Sarah looked puzzled. Special presentation? Yes, ma'am. He said you'd understand when you saw it. Sarah and I exchanged glances, neither of us certain what this additional element might involve. The lieutenant gestured toward a side room where General Harrison was visible through the doorway, speaking with several other senior officers. I guess we're about to find out, Sarah said, taking my arm as we walked toward the mystery presentation. The side room had been set up with a projection screen and several chairs arranged in a semicircle. General Harrison stood beside a laptop, his expression carrying the anticipation of someone about to reveal a significant surprise. Several other officers were present, including a colonel I didn't recognize and a female major who seemed to be documenting the proceedings. Sarah, Jennifer, please have a seat, General Harrison said, gesturing toward chairs in the front row. What you're about to see represents months of work by multiple departments, all focused on properly recognizing Sarah's contributions during Operation Desert Shield. He clicked a button on the laptop, and the screen filled with an official-looking document bearing multiple seals and signatures. At the top, in formal military typography, were the words, Bronze Star Medal Recommendation. Sarah's intake of breath was audible in the quiet room. Sir, I thought the Bronze Star recommendation was still under review. It was, General Harrison replied with a slight smile. Until this morning. The final approval came through at 0700 hours, just in time for today's ceremony. The document on the screen detailed Sarah's actions during the convoy attack David had described earlier, but seeing it in official language, with specific tactical details and outcome assessments, drove home the magnitude of what she'd accomplished. The dry military prose couldn't completely mask the drama of the situation, a young officer making split-second decisions that meant the difference between life and death for hundreds of people. But that's not the only reason we're here, General Harrison continued. He clicked to the next slide, which showed what appeared to be a military base layout, with various buildings marked in different colors. Sarah, your innovations in supply chain management during the deployment have been adopted as standard operating procedures across multiple commands. The screen showed a complex diagram of supply routes, inventory management systems, and communication protocols. To my untrained eye, it looked like an intricate puzzle, but the officers in the room were studying it with obvious professional interest. The Mitchell method, as it's become known in logistics circles, has improved efficiency by 40% and reduced supply interruptions by 60% across all forward operating bases that have implemented it. Sarah was staring at the screen with an expression of amazement. "Sir, I was just trying to solve immediate problems. I never intended to create a systematic approach." The best innovations often come from practical problem solving rather than theoretical planning, General Harrison replied. "Your methods are being taught at the Army Logistics University and have been incorporated into field manuals for desert operations." He clicked to another slide, this one showing a series of photographs from various military bases. Each image showed supply operations that had apparently been improved using Sarah's methods. Soldiers loading vehicles with systematic precision, supply convoys moving through challenging terrain, forward operating bases that looked well organized and efficiently operated. These photographs represent operations at 12 different bases across 3 different combat zones. All of them are using modifications of approaches you developed during your deployment. The room was quiet except for the hum of the projection equipment. I could see Sarah processing the information, trying to reconcile her view of herself as someone who had simply done her job with the reality of her broader impact on military operations. "There's one more thing," General Harrison said, his tone becoming more personal. "We've received permission to name the new logistics training facility at Fort Benning after you. The Sarah Mitchell Center for Applied Military Logistics will be dedicated next month." Sarah's composure finally cracked. Tears began flowing down her cheeks as she struggled to process the magnitude of what she was hearing. A military facility named in her honor represented a level of recognition that went far beyond normal career advancement. "Sir, I don't know what to say. This is incredibly overwhelming." "You don't need to say anything," General Harrison replied gently. "Your actions have already spoken louder than any words could. But there is one more element to today's presentation." He gestured toward the female major, who stepped forward with a small wooden box. "Major Patterson has been documenting the impact of your methods on soldier welfare. She has some statistics that might interest you." Major Patterson opened the box to reveal what appeared to be a collection of letters and photographs. "Colonel Mitchell, these are thank you notes from soldiers who were directly affected by your logistics innovations. Some of them are from Forward Operating Base Delta, where your actions during the siege ensured they received critical supplies." She pulled out several letters and began reading excerpts. Each one was from a different soldier, describing how Sarah's work had affected their deployment experience. Some mentioned receiving desperately needed medical supplies. Others described how improved food distribution had boosted morale during difficult periods. One letter was from a soldier whose life had been saved by the timely arrival of ammunition during a firefight. "In total, we've documented over 800 individual cases where your innovations directly contributed to soldier welfare and safety," Major Patterson continued. "That represents 800 families who had their loved ones return home safely because of your work." The numbers were staggering. I'd known that Sarah's military service was meaningful, but understanding the specific human impact of her contributions was almost overwhelming. Each statistic represented real people, real families, real lives that had been affected by my sister's dedication and innovation. Sarah was openly crying now, no longer attempting to maintain her military composure. "I never realized. I knew my work was important, but seeing it quantified like this." "That's exactly why we wanted to present this information today," General Harrison said. "Military personnel often don't get to see the full impact of their contributions. You've been focused on immediate tactical problems, but your solutions have had strategic implications that extend far beyond your original deployment." He clicked to a final slide, which showed a timeline of Sarah's military career alongside the various innovations and improvements that had resulted from her service. The visual representation made clear that her impact had been building over time, with each assignment contributing to a growing legacy of improved military effectiveness. "Jennifer," General Harrison said, turning to address me directly, "I wanted you to see this presentation because I think it's important for families to understand what their loved ones accomplished during military service. Sarah's work isn't just about following orders or completing assignments. She's been actively making the military more effective and keeping soldiers safer. The presentation concluded with a standing ovation from the officers in the room. As the applause died down, Sarah stood and embraced me with an intensity that conveyed everything she couldn't put into words. "I'm so proud of you," I whispered. "Not just for today, but for everything you've accomplished. For the person you've become." "I couldn't have done any of it without knowing you believed in me," Sarah replied. "Even when we weren't talking regularly, I carried your voice with me. The way you taught me to see problems as opportunities for creativity, that's what made the difference in the field." The revelation that my childhood art lessons had somehow contributed to Sarah's military innovations was almost too much to process. The connection between teaching her to layer watercolors and her ability to develop complex logistics solutions seemed impossible, yet Sarah's words suggested there was a real link between the two. General Harrison approached as the other officers began to disperse. "Miss Crawford, I hope today has given you a better understanding of your sister's service. She's mentioned many times that your support has been crucial to her success." "Actually, General, I think I'm the one who's been supported," I replied. "I've learned more about courage and dedication today than I have in years. Sarah has been protecting and serving people while I've been, well, painting pictures." "Don't minimize your contribution," Sarah said firmly. "Art matters, Jennifer. Beauty matters. The ability to see the world through different perspectives matters. That's what we're all fighting to protect. The freedom for people to create and express themselves and live meaningful lives." She was right, of course. The military existed to protect the society that allowed artists and teachers, and countless other civilians to pursue their passions without fear. Sarah's service and my art were part of the same larger mission, maintaining a world where both could flourish. As we prepared to return to the main reception, I realized that the day had given me more than just a reconciliation with my sister. It had provided a new understanding of how individual contributions fit into larger purposes, how personal relationships support professional achievements, and how misunderstandings can be overcome through honest communication and mutual respect. The ceremony had been about recognizing Sarah's military accomplishments, but the real victory was the restoration of a relationship that had been damaged by distance and misunderstanding. Sometimes the most important battles are fought not with weapons or strategy, but with vulnerability and the courage to bridge the gaps that separate us from the people we love most. Walking back toward the reception, Sarah's arm linked through mine, I felt the weight of the compass in my purse and realized that we'd both found our true north. 6 months after the ceremony, I received a package that would change everything I thought I knew about my sister's military service. The return address showed Fort Benning, Georgia, the location of the Sarah Mitchell Center for Applied Military Logistics that had been dedicated 3 weeks earlier. Inside was a leather-bound album with a note attached in Sarah's precise handwriting. "Jennifer, these are the stories I couldn't tell you before. Now I can share everything." The album contained photographs, letters, and documents that revealed layers of Sarah's deployment experience I'd never suspected. Combat action reports detailed nighttime missions where she'd personally led supply convoys through hostile territory. Medical evacuation records showed instances where her logistics coordination had enabled life-saving helicopter rescues. Intelligence briefings revealed the strategic importance of operations she'd described as, quote, "routine supply runs." But it was the personal letters that affected me most deeply. Handwritten notes from soldiers describing how Sarah's innovations had impacted their daily lives in ways that went far beyond military efficiency. A corporal wrote about receiving warm meals for the first time in weeks because of Sarah's cold storage improvements. A sergeant described how her communication protocols had enabled him to call his newborn daughter from a forward operating base. Each letter represented a human story that had been touched by Sarah's dedication. Reading them, I began to understand that her military service wasn't just about following orders or climbing career ladders. She'd been actively improving the lives of people who depended on her expertise and leadership. The album also contained photographs I'd never seen before. Sarah working alongside enlisted personnel, her sleeves rolled up, and her uniform dusty from field conditions. Sarah briefing senior officers. pointing to maps and charts with the confidence of someone who thoroughly understood complex logistics challenges. One photograph particularly caught my attention. Sarah was standing beside a military vehicle, studying a small framed picture she held in her hands. I recognized it immediately. A photograph of the two of us from childhood, taken during a family camping trip when we were maybe 10 and 12 years old. In the picture, we were covered in mud from exploring a creek, our arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera with unself-conscious joy. The realization that Sarah had carried that photograph through combat deployments hit me with unexpected force. While I'd been assuming she'd moved beyond our childhood connection, she'd been literally carrying memories of our relationship into some of the most dangerous situations imaginable. That evening, I called Sarah at her new assignment in Colorado. David answered the phone with easy familiarity. "She's in the field until Thursday," he explained. "Training exercise with the new logistics unit. But she specifically asked me to tell you about the album if it arrived while she was gone." David, I had no idea about most of what's in here. The combat situations, the life and death decisions, the personal risks she took. "She didn't want you to worry. Sarah has this protective instinct that extends to everyone she cares about. During deployments, she'd edit her stories to focus on the positive aspects and minimize the dangerous elements." His explanation made sense, but it also revealed how thoroughly Sarah had been managing our relationship to shield me from realities she thought I couldn't handle. The irony was that learning about her actual experiences made me more proud of her, not more worried. "There's something else," David continued. "Sarah's been selected for a special assignment. She's going to be the military liaison to a congressional committee studying veteran services. It's a significant honor, but it means she'll be based in Washington for the next 2 years." 2 weeks later, I received a call from Sarah herself. Her voice carried the excitement of someone who'd just received unexpected good news. "Jennifer, I have something incredible to tell you. The congressional committee assignment includes opportunities for family members to attend certain hearings and briefings. I want you to come to Washington and see what I'm working on." The invitation was both thrilling and intimidating. Attending congressional hearings would give me unprecedented access to Sarah's professional world, but it would also mean entering environments where I had no expertise or natural comfort zone. "Are you sure that's appropriate? I don't know anything about military policy or veteran services." "That's exactly why your perspective would be valuable. The committee is trying to understand how military policies affect families and communities. Your experience as a civilian who's connected to military service could provide insights that pure military testimony might miss." Over the following weeks, I prepared for the Washington trip by reading extensively about veteran services, military families, and the challenges of transitioning from military to civilian life. The research was eye-opening, revealing complex issues that affected millions of people but received limited public attention. The Washington trip exceeded all my expectations. The congressional hearing room was smaller than I'd imagined, but the discussions were more substantive and nuanced than typical political discourse. Sarah's testimony was masterful. She presented complex information clearly while advocating passionately for improved veteran services. Watching her interact with senators and representatives, I saw a side of Sarah I'd never witnessed before. She was simultaneously respectful and assertive, deferential to civilian authority, while confidently defending her expertise. The same leadership qualities that had made her successful in combat situations were perfectly suited to political environments. During a break in the hearings, Senator Margaret Walsh approached me with curiosity about my presence. "Are you connected to the military, Ms. Crawford?" "My sister is Colonel Mitchell, the logistics expert who just testified. I'm here as a civilian observer." "What's your impression of the issues we're discussing?" The question caught me off guard, but I found myself responding with genuine engagement. "I think there's a gap between public perception of military service and the reality of what soldiers and their families actually experience. The support systems that exist are often invisible to civilians, which makes it difficult to generate broader public support for improvements." Senator Walsh nodded thoughtfully. "That's a perceptive observation. How do you think we could better communicate these realities to civilian audiences?" Art, storytelling, personal narratives, ways of making abstract policy issues emotionally accessible. Statistics are important, but they don't create the kind of understanding that motivates people to support change. The conversation continued for several minutes, covering topics ranging from community integration programs to educational opportunities for military families. I found myself contributing ideas and perspectives that seemed to resonate with the senator's thinking. Afterward, Sarah joined me in the hallway with an expression of amazement and pride. "Jennifer, you were incredible in there. Your suggestions about narrative approaches to policy communication were exactly what the committee needed to hear. I just answered her questions honestly. I didn't realize I was making formal suggestions. That's what made it so effective. You weren't trying to impress anyone or advance an agenda. You were just sharing genuine insights from your perspective as a civilian who's connected to military life." The validation was gratifying, but more importantly, it represented a breakthrough in my understanding of how I could contribute to Sarah's world. My civilian background wasn't a limitation. It was a complementary perspective that could enhance purely military approaches to complex challenges. The trip concluded with a private dinner where Sarah, David, and I could reflect on the day's experiences without the formal constraints of official proceedings. The conversation was relaxed but substantive, covering everything from policy implications to personal reflections on service and sacrifice. "Jennifer, I need to tell you something," Sarah said as we prepared to leave the restaurant. "Having you there today, seeing you engage with these issues and contribute meaningful insights, it felt like we'd finally found a way to bridge our different worlds. I feel the same way. For the first time, I understand not just what you do, but why it matters and how I might be able to support it." The Washington trip exceeded all my expectations. The congressional hearing room was smaller than I'd imagined, but the discussions were more substantive and nuanced than typical political discourse. Sarah's testimony was masterful. She presented complex information clearly while advocating passionately for improved veteran services. Watching her interact with senators and representatives, I saw a side of Sarah I'd never witnessed before. She was simultaneously respectful and assertive, deferential to civilian authority while confidently defending her expertise. The same leadership qualities that had made her successful in combat situations were perfectly suited to political environments. During a break in the hearings, Senator Margaret Walsh approached me with curiosity about my presence. "Are you connected to the military, Ms. Crawford?" "My sister is Colonel Mitchell, the logistics expert who just testified. I'm here as a civilian observer." "What's your impression of the issues we're discussing?" The question caught me off guard, but I found myself responding with genuine engagement. "I think there's a gap between public perception of military service and the reality of what soldiers and their families actually experience. The support systems that exist are often invisible to civilians, which makes it difficult to generate broader public support for improvements." Senator Walsh nodded thoughtfully. "That's a perceptive observation. How do you think we could better communicate these realities to civilian audiences?" Art, storytelling, personal narratives, ways of making abstract policy issues emotionally accessible. Statistics are important, but they don't create the kind of understanding that motivates people to support change. The conversation continued for several minutes, covering topics ranging from community integration programs to educational opportunities for military families. I found myself contributing ideas and perspectives that seemed to resonate with the senator's thinking. Afterward, Sarah joined me in the hallway with an expression of amazement and pride. "Jennifer, you were incredible in there. Your suggestions about narrative approaches to policy communication were exactly what the committee needed to hear. I just answered her questions honestly. I didn't realize I was making formal suggestions. That's what made it so effective. You weren't trying to impress anyone or advance an agenda. You were just sharing genuine insights from your perspective as a civilian who's connected to military life." The validation was gratifying, but more importantly, it represented a breakthrough in my understanding of how I could contribute to Sarah's world. My civilian background wasn't a limitation. It was a complementary perspective that could enhance purely military approaches to complex challenges. The trip concluded with a private dinner where Sarah, David, and I could reflect on the day's experiences without the formal constraints of official proceedings. The conversation was relaxed but substantive, covering everything from policy implications to personal reflections on service and sacrifice. "Jennifer, I need to tell you something," Sarah said as we prepared to leave the restaurant. "Having you there today, seeing you engage with these issues and contribute meaningful insights, it felt like we'd finally found a way to bridge our different worlds." "I feel the same way. For the first time, I understand not just what you do, but why it matters and how I might be able to support it." The Washington trip exceeded all my expectations. The congressional hearing room was smaller than I'd imagined, but the discussions were more substantive and nuanced than typical political discourse. Sarah's testimony was masterful. She presented complex information clearly while advocating passionately for improved veteran services. Watching her interact with senators and representatives, I saw a side of Sarah I'd never witnessed before. She was simultaneously respectful and assertive, deferential to civilian authority, while confidently defending her expertise. The same leadership qualities that had made her successful in combat situations were perfectly suited to political environments. During a break in the hearings, Senator Margaret Walsh approached me with curiosity about my presence. "Are you connected to the military, Ms. Crawford?" "My sister is Colonel Mitchell, the logistics expert who just testified. I'm here as a civilian observer." "What's your impression of the issues we're discussing?" The question caught me off guard, but I found myself responding with genuine engagement. "I think there's a gap between public perception of military service and the reality of what soldiers and their families actually experience. The support systems that exist are often invisible to civilians, which makes it difficult to generate broader public support for improvements." Senator Walsh nodded thoughtfully. "That's a perceptive observation. How do you think we could better communicate these realities to civilian audiences?" "Art, storytelling, personal narratives, ways of making abstract policy issues emotionally accessible. Statistics are important, but they don't create the kind of understanding that motivates people to support change." The conversation continued for several minutes, covering topics ranging from community integration programs to educational opportunities for military families. I found myself contributing ideas and perspectives that seemed to resonate with the senator's thinking. Afterward, Sarah joined me in the hallway with an expression of amazement and pride. "Jennifer, you were incredible in there. Your suggestions about narrative approaches to policy communication were exactly what the committee needed to hear." I just answered her questions honestly. I didn't realize I was making formal suggestions. That's what made it so effective. You weren't trying to impress anyone or advance an agenda. You were just sharing genuine insights from your perspective as a civilian who's connected to military life. The validation was gratifying, but more importantly, it represented a breakthrough in my understanding of how I could contribute to Sarah's world. My civilian background wasn't a limitation. It was a complementary perspective that could enhance purely military approaches to complex challenges. The trip concluded with a private dinner where Sarah, David, and I could reflect on the day's experiences without the formal constraints of official proceedings. The conversation was relaxed but substantive, covering everything from policy implications to personal reflections on service and sacrifice. "Jennifer, I need to tell you something," Sarah said as we prepared to leave the restaurant. "Having you there today, seeing you engage with these issues and contribute meaningful insights, it felt like we'd finally found a way to bridge our different worlds." "I feel the same way. For the first time, I understand not just what you do, but why it matters and how I might be able to support it." There's going to be more opportunities like this. The committee work is ongoing, and they're specifically interested in civilian perspectives on military issues. Would you be interested in participating on a more regular basis? The invitation represented exactly the kind of meaningful engagement I'd been seeking. Contributing to policy discussions that affected military families would give me a sense of purpose while deepening my connection to Sarah's professional world. "Yes," I said without hesitation, "I want to be part of this." As we walked back to the hotel, I reflected on how dramatically our relationship had evolved since that confusing morning at Fort Harrison. What had started as a painful misunderstanding about a guest list had ultimately led to a deeper understanding of each other's worlds and a shared commitment to supporting the military community. The ceremony 6 months earlier had been about recognizing Sarah's individual achievements, but tonight felt like the beginning of a joint mission. We'd learned that love requires courage, that family requires effort, and that the most important victories are often the ones that bring people together rather than setting them apart. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.